So my motivation for looking at this topic and publishing on it through the forum is that the deep appreciation I have for the dynamics of playing in a small group ensemble, mainly in the kind of jazz area, and how this can inspire a human-centered style for leadership and team motivation. So I'm not a professional musician, although I've been playing for a number of years, I think, like Mig is. And I'm a manager, team builder, team player, and there are a number of really useful perspectives you get from playing music that can apply themselves to a business dynamic. So I've seen how the approach of some of our world's leading jazz players can inform the business community to have what I called self-inspire, self-managing teams. So my starting point for this topic came from two previous articles which I wrote for the Forum publications, and they were based on interviews with 20 mid-career professionals working across different cultures, countries, and professions. And I simply asked them what they liked and disliked about their current leadership, what they would do differently if they were in the leader's chair. So I won't give that whole analysis now, but the key takeaways are predictably they wanted more recognition of their talents and abilities, more autonomy, and they would be motivated by a less directive approach. And that's kind of interesting for me because playing music really supports that way of interacting. And the magical aspect that musical interaction brings to a team is it's a group composed of highly trained, well prepared and talented professionals, but their roles and skill sets aren't really interchangeable. But they can only, then the paradox is they can only succeed in creating one agreed or good outcome if they work tightly together and they fully support each other. And that above all, it means learning to become an excellent listener. So it's a team that follows an agreed path. It's self-organizing to adapt and achieve to the agreed outcome. It's very dynamic, and the interaction can be, of course, different every time, but to achieve the same result. So that's the kind of magic that I feel when I listen to nice music, when I see people playing, and when I participate myself. So in a recent conversation, our friend Patrick Cowden, who's sitting here, really neatly summarized the whole key requirement in one word. He said, look, it's about trust. So that's what I wanted to share.
Yeah, I like this. I like the inspiration of this. The wonder of music is that people do create collectively various things. Uh, the thing that struck me, at least if you're thinking about this from the perspective of leadership, is in part you have to make sure that the participants have the right tools and are able to use them to the fullest ability that they can for the whole to come together. And often um, that's a dilemma for people in leadership in working with groups is getting a real sense of, do the people have the capacity to, this person is playing the saxophone, but would they actually be better playing the trombone? And do they have the trombone to play, uh, so that they have the tools to be able to participate and actually make their skills come through for whatever the group effort is.
Michael, thank you for the prompt. And when I have listened and spent time with musicians, one thing that really strikes me is how much time they have to spend practicing. It feels very rigid. They do their standards, their scales, their studies. Me and my own children do the same. And there just aren't really very many shortcuts. In this day and age, we want shortcuts. We want to outsource leadership to AI. It's about the miles, walking the miles as a leader. It's about in the practice. From there comes creativity, comes intuition, which is seems counterintuitive. That intuition is something we learn and acquire with experience. But I guess that was my reflection prompted by your brilliant insights. Thanks, Michael.
tried to keep my two careers separate for 30 years. And then I started a company which is pretty inactive, which is called Jazz Is Now. And the purpose of this company I see in actually bringing the jazz world to professionals from a different field. And in my experience, people pretty well resonate to a jazz model because people can imagine to be on. They were in the audience for concerts. Maybe they played an instrument. They can imagine being on stage, and then you can tell stories, especially when it's your own stories that can help. Okay, so one thing that Ben just brought up, and Patrick brought this up in your conversation in YouTube, it's the practice thing. And as you said, Ben, I mean, when I get up in the morning, the first thing I do is I play a note on my trumpet every day. And this is what you don't see when people are on stage, right? So practicing is one thing. And the other thing that Preston mentioned, it's interesting that we can look at instruments as tools, or we can look at instruments as part of our identity. And this is when I talk to teams or individuals in teams. Teams nowadays, depending on where you're at, sometimes there are these Me Too people or people that are frustrated because they think they're replaceable, etc., etc. And from small creative jazz bands, you can tell them, hey, you are special, you are unique, you have facets that only you have, you make a difference. And the bass player is the only person in the band that can really play the bass. He has or she has responsibilities, as you have in your team. So putting the focus on the individual, and then having individuals as a complex adaptive system constituting the actual band. These are conversations I have with people, and they're typically pretty fruitful.
Yeah, this practice element, I'm going to use a term for that. As we, if I'm going to call it being attuned to each other, right? That deep listening, that presence, that understanding, that, in basketball, we call it the no-look pass. You just don't do a no-look pass. If you're not attuned and the guy receiving the pass doesn't know the pass is coming, it's kind of embarrassing because the ball hits you in the face. And that's just not good. Right? So that attunement means the giver and the receiver are kind of connected and then kind of feel it, right? They kind of sense it. What it means is we start to activate senses we don't usually use in the transactional part of our jobs. It's a relational sense, right? And it's a relational sense of the connection of things, not just of people. And I think the attunement of that needs practice. It needs to be practiced every day, multitudes of times, right? Not just a weekend offsite. It's really, it becomes part of every meeting.
But I think when I think about jazz and comparing it into sort of the organization, I always think about how it's like improvising within a structure, I guess. So there's a sort of a collective, like a North Star, or a sort of something that is the structure you're within, but you can individually pick up and do different things and experiment and do things like that. And I think it's a really good analogy for leadership today, where we're in such a world of increasing complexity and ambiguity and nobody having the answers. So to me, there is quite a good connection between thinking about music and in particular jazz. We often hear, I'd be interested in Michael Devlin, Michael D. Another thing we hear about quite often is that sort of idea of the orchestra. And how's the orchestra fit with organizations? And so, is the orchestra still a relevant sort of model, if we want to call it that, compared to jazz? Or is jazz really more what it's about today, where we are individuals experimenting, creating, looking differently at things, but we know we've still got that North Star we're working within?
I think when
That makes sense. I don't know.
no, it's really interesting question because people talk about let's make sure the orchestra is tuned, but the conductor of the orchestra tells everybody what to do and when to move. And maybe I'm oversimplifying, but when you're playing with a group of two, three, four, five people who are playing, I use jazz as kind of a shorthand because there are other types of playing where people are playing some kind of folk music or some kind of, just semi-improvised music where it's set up, but then you have to take group responsibility for delivering it, and the result is similar. The planning and the direction are set, but how you get there is different every time.
I think there's kind of the two distinct lessons from music. One is the smaller team that can self-manage, the jazz group, where they trust each other, they understand each other, they practice together, and it all comes out as one because they're attuned to each other. And a larger group, which is an orchestra, it's more of an analogy with a larger organization, where by definition they can't all know each other intimately.
True.
Each subsection may do, obviously. So the role of the conductor then becomes one of coordinating, not telling individuals how to play their instruments, but telling individuals what sound he or she wants out of them to get it blended into something that makes a whole. And the problem with a lot of managers is, of course, that they should be stepping back and orchestrating and conducting, but what they try and do is micromanage and tell individuals how to do their job, which is, of course, if you've got professional musicians, they don't need to be told how to bow a violin or blow a clarinet. They know how to do that. The role of the conductor is much more one of coordination.
I was struck by that mention of coordination and the idea of an orchestra being rather more about coordination. It struck me that today an organization I was working with was trying to get its people to think less about coordination and more about collaboration. And so it strikes me that the jazz band metaphor is much more about collaboration. And to that point, there's also another piece which I think is the end user, a customer in a business sense, the audience perhaps in a jazz sense, and what they see and what they experience. And I think collaboration allows you to have other people's back as well. So when things are not going so well, if you can improvise, both I think in a jazz context, but also in an organizational context, then the overall effect for the audience or the general public or the consumer is one of enjoyment and smoothness. And I think that aspect of being able to cover for other people and improvise is like when you're in a play or something like that, and your partner forgets their line, for example. You have to improvise and come up with something that enables them to get back on track. And I think that's an expertise that leadership also needs.
I'd just like to make one last comment rather than trying to summarize all that. And that is, I talked about experience. And since the 60s, I have seen all the big artists, rock, jazz, all the stuff. Some of them I saw with Preston in the late 60s when we were in school together. And the one that, and they're all great, the world stars and the kind of national people who are unknown but incredibly talented. The one act that stood out, the one experience, was these two Siberian throat singers who had almost no equipment. They each had a little stringed instrument with 3 strings with real string on it, not metal. It looked like a homemade thing. And one had the mouth harp, and they had the 2 tones in the throat, and they were playing their music, which is some folk songs. And they just sat. It was a place in Germany. They sat down and they played this thing, and it was a whole experience of vibration, of interaction, and you could tell that it's so much part of them that it has a totally different level and effect than all of the great stuff that I'd seen. So of all of the things that I saw, that's the one that's most memorable. And I kind of saw it by accident, because I'm not a big throat singing record collector. Well, now a little bit, but I was shocked, and the effect it has, and the fact that with very, very simple tools, they get this beautiful, the beautiful landscape. If you haven't experienced that, it's worth it. So anyway, I think, yeah, the orchestra, the coordination versus collaboration versus improvisation. I think you need all of it, but I think with teams, if we can learn to or be better at having that experience rather than just explaining what people should do and let the thing happen organically. In a lot of cases, that can be if you're talking about catching and keeping talent, well, that's probably the best way to do it.